What's up, folks? It's your boy, the man with the ADCC body and the AC/DC vocals, Jack Slack. It's Monday the 25th of September, Monday morning, getting this done good and early this week, because I've actually watched all the fights already and thought I might as well get into it. We had a UFC event in Japan, which would have been Friday eve. No, the time zones confuse me, but I definitely watched it on Saturday. So there was a UFC event and then there was a Bellator event, I believe Saturday evening in the US, Bellator 183, and they were all right, actually. They were pretty good. So we'll cover those in a minute. We got lots of questions to get through today, some really good ones, actually. Some out there, bigger picture, more than just the fighting world questions. And not any events going on. No events going on this weekend, but we've also got ADCC to catch up on. The big grappling tournament that happens once every 2 years. Really fun year, with several non-Brazilians winning their categories, which is always awesome, and just shows how much the sport's moved along. But first, let's do some news. So the big story of this week, after I got a question on the podcast last week from someone with a Russian name that I couldn't read, about Jake LaMotta, and it was a really, it was just tacked on the end of a normal question, just, and by the way, Jake LaMotta. Almost immediately after I spoke about that and then uploaded the episode, Jake LaMotta died, which was a little bit creepy, just after I'd said, and he's still kicking at 90-something. Turns out he made it to the age of 95, which is insane for a guy who spent the first 30 years of his life, 40 years of his life, being punched in the face. And, he was someone we all knew for his chin. You don't get a reputation for an iron chin unless you get hit a lot. If you want my full poignant, fully edited, well-written views on Jake LaMotta, I wrote an article for Vice on Wednesday, I believe, called Jake LaMotta, A Portrait of Resilience, where I just talked about his life story. And it was interesting because after this, there were a few There was a guy in The Guardian who did an article basically saying that Raging Bull had mythologized Jake LaMotta as a much more important fighter than he was. And I think, I talked about this in the article, but I think that importance is relative. You can consider whoever you want important, but no one is calling him an all-time great. No one's saying he was one of the greatest fighters who ever lived. No one even says he's one of the greatest middleweights. I referenced this in the article. Nat Fleischer, in 50 Years at Ringside, which he wrote in 1958, there had been 21 middleweight champions of the world. He listed his top 10. Jake LaMotta didn't even get a word in edgeways. Sugar Ray Robinson came in at number 5, I believe, and LaMotta's name doesn't even appear in the book. So it's just, he was an important character in the saga of Sugar Ray Robinson. And, don't let that overshadow how important he was in the Sugar Ray Robinson story, because he was the first loss on Robinson's record. In their second fight, he beat Robinson, took Robinson to 40-1, and then Robinson won, I believe he got to 128-1 before he lost again, which is just insane. I believe that, that second loss might have been Turpin, or it could have been Maxim. Maxim's the one that people generally don't consider as a proper loss, because he went up to light heavyweight and just exhausted himself under the ring lights. But at any rate, Jake LaMotta, a remarkable character, and also important to boxing because he was one of the first, maybe the most important fighter to ever come forward and say, look, I did this, I threw a fight because these guys wanted me to. It was back when they were trying to nail down Frankie Carbo and what's his name, Blinky Palermo? A couple of mob guys who were basically running boxing back then. And Jake LaMotta was offered $100,000 to lose to, what was his name, Gennaro, maybe? I forget. But he refused to and beat the tar out of that guy. And then later they said, will you fall down against Billy Fox, who again had this unbeaten record but really wasn't that special. And he said, okay, on the condition you get me a title shot later. even then, when they got him the title shot against Marcel Cerdan, Cerdan's American representatives, so basically people related to Cerdan, but not actually his management, on the US side, said, we'll need another 20 grand for the fight. A fight which he was being paid 19 grand as a purse. So he just had to borrow an extra grand from somewhere to pay for this title fight, which he did win in the end. But again, that title fight is a bit of a weird one too, because Marcel Cerdan dislocated his left shoulder in the first round, and you can watch the fight online on YouTube. Well, I think clips of it are online, clips of most rounds, but you can see that Cerdan doesn't throw any left punches from that point on, and LaMotta just sticks to him and keeps hitting him, and eventually I think he's forced to retire in the 10th round, or at the end of the 10th round. But of course, Marcel Cerdan, if you don't know, now you know. No, if you don't know Marcel Cerdan, he was, I believe he was African-born, one of the French African colonies, but he was a Frenchman, and he won the middleweight title of the world. Terrifically exciting fighter, big hero over there in France, and was in a romantic affair with Edith Piaf. She wrote some songs about him, and basically he signed the rematch with LaMotta, and on the flight over to the US, his plane crashed and killed everyone on board. Really makes you appreciate how safe air travel is now, because, you know, him, Rocky Marciano, I believe one of the Turpins, either Dick or, no, it was probably Dick, not Randy, died in the plane crash. And then, of course, you got the Big Bopper and Buddy Holly and all those people. Yeah, makes you appreciate how much safer air travel is nowadays. But so Cerdan never got his rematch, so there was always that sort of question mark over whether LaMotta even won the middleweight title in the first place. He defended it a few times and then lost it to Sugar Ray in their 6th fight. I will say the 6th fight is the one we have footage of, and I was surprised, watching it back for the first time in years, I was surprised that LaMotta was out-jabbing Sugar Ray for the first 2 rounds. He just crouches really low. He's got a really awkward style that seems partly self-taught. You know, it's not like textbook like Robinson's, but he leans deep down to his right side, and then anytime Robinson jabs, he ducks under it and comes up with a double jab. And for the first 2 rounds, he's really doing well with that. And then he starts banging the body. But then Robinson, it's just the variety of punches, and all of them came with power, and all of them were crisp, fast counter punches. And Robinson bangs his body, hits him with counter left uppercuts, counter right uppercuts, just works him over. And that's the one that he gets the TKO in. But famously, he never gets LaMotta down. No one ever knocked LaMotta down. Even in the fight he threw, he just stood against the ropes and did nothing. And apparently in the hearings, he said, I lost especially badly just so people would know something was up. And the New York State Athletic Commission withheld his purse and the Billy Fox's purse for that fight that he threw. It was very suspicious at the time, but eventually they just had to give in because he threatened legal action, and they didn't really have a leg to stand on, aside from it looked weird. At any rate, an important figure in boxing, and then, of course, Raging Bull itself was source material. His ghost-written memoir was the source material for Raging Bull the film, which was fantastic. If you haven't seen Raging Bull the film, I highly recommend it. Back when Robert De Niro was an actor, as Doug Stanhope said. Yeah, 95 is a ripe old age. I mean, apparently he'd basically lost it all at the end, but who is, you know, the very few people who are still sharp and with it at 95. And if you're a boxer, you don't have much right being sharp and with it at like 70 or 80, and he apparently was. So a great run for Jake LaMotta, and a good chance to go back and watch what few fights of his we have on film. Other bits of news. I've got just a bit of bollocks news here. Deontay Wilder says he'd be willing to fight Brock Lesnar if the money was right. That's bollocks. Deontay Wilder, of course, not fought anyone good in boxing yet. But, you know, heavyweight boxing, who gives a shit? And then they were going to do John Jones versus Brock Lesnar, but John Jones failed the test. Poor old Brock Lesnar can't find the money fight. I don't know if he beat Braun Strowman or not at No Way Out the other night. I haven't checked yet. And then the other news was that Diaz-McGregor 3 is in the works for the night before New Year's Eve, but Dana White said no, it isn't. I mean, who gives a shit, really? I mean, if it happens, I'll get tons of hits out of it and sell my book, but at this point, they've just passed up on free money by not making the Ferguson-Nate Diaz fight, and by not actually reintegrating Diaz into the division. You've now got the actual division, and then Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor, who aren't actually in the division. So they're never going to transfer their star power. They're never going to build any other stars out of it. And I wouldn't be surprised if they managed to put like Tony or Khabib or someone like that on the undercard of Conor and Diaz so that no one really sees them. Or Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee could have won at that point. My boy, Kevin Lee. But anyway, that's enough for news at the moment and eulogizing, you Googleizing. We'll do some recaps of the UFC Japan event. So, of course, the main event was OSP versus Okami, which was desperate. I mean, that was when they had to find a local light heavyweight and they couldn't because it's Japan, so they got a local welterweight who used to be a middleweight. And they released his one knockout in the UFC this week to try and hype the fight, and nobody was buying it. Okami is just such a boring fighter. Just plodding right jab and takedowns, and that's about it. But yeah, OSP comes out immediately, sprawls on a takedown. Okami pulls half guard, and then OSP starts digging his head under the elbow for an arm triangle. Okami wraps the head like he's going for a crap guillotine from the bottom of half guard and gets Von Flue choked. So another OSP Von Flue choke. He's got 3 now. It's ludicrous. Apparently no significant strikes thrown in that fight. Cool. Well, there's one reason to maybe remember it in 2 years' time. We'll save Gadelha versus Andrade for last because that was the best. We'll go from the bottom now. So Formiga versus Ulka Sasaki. I thought that was a fun fight. Was impressed by Formiga's grappling on the ground once they hit the mat. Ulka Sasaki had looked really good against Wilson Hayes. Strong in the clinch, difficult on the feet because he's so long, but really seems to have small issues once it hits the mat. Ishihara versus Dai. I mean, what are you going to say? Dai comes out. Firstly, Dai. They were talking about how his dad was the Manny Pacquiao before Manny Pacquiao. I was like, oh, okay, steady on. But he walks with his back to the fence all fight, and then he throws up a right round kick, which Ishihara steps away from, and then he does the slowest turn you've ever seen, turns his back, comes all the way around, and then Ishihara blasts him as he turns to face him again. Yeah, it just shouldn't be happening, really. And then, later on he started to pick more counter punches on Ishihara because Ishihara is not a very technical striker. He's just exploiting the holes in the game of many MMA guys, dropping the hands, reaching for people. Lots of groin kicks, and then Dai was on Instagram or whatever it is today being like, oh, he faked the groin shot. I was like, well, at least there's one reason to get excited about this fight, which wasn't really spectacular. Dong Hyun Kim starched Gomi, of course he did. Bit of an early stoppage, but at this point I don't really care. It's just been so long since Gomi was good. Someone posted Nate Diaz beating Gomi to Reddit the other day, and someone commented, back when beating Gomi meant something. And I had to be like, no, not really. People forget that between the end of Pride and when Gomi got to the UFC, there were 3 years. And in those 3 years, he lost to Satoru Kitaoka, some Russian lad you've never heard of, and then got a gift decision over Tai Hyun Bang, who also made him look like crap. Gomi has been not good for a very long time. And then they brought him in just to stop Japanese promotions having him and to pad up dudes' records. I love Ken Flo, but that was what they did. They padded up Ken Flo, padded up Nate Diaz. The only fight he's really looked good in, even the ones they fed him wins in, like, what was his name, Miseota? The Japanese lad who just couldn't deal with him at all. The only fight he's really looked decent in was the Diego Sanchez one, but then everyone looks decent against Diego Sanchez at this point, and they still lose the decision. Oh dear. So go home, Gomi. You've had too much. It's exactly the same reason they kept Kid Yamamoto around. Star power in Japan, don't want other promotions having him. Can't win a fight, but we'll keep him around. Then you had Gokhan Saki making his MMA debut. Someone asked me what I thought after watching this fight, and my main thought was, how bad is this division? I knew they picked Henrique de Silva because of the Cutelaba fight. Or, was his name Ion Cutelaba? Cutelaba. The guy who just swings wild on people, because de Silva got overwhelmed very quickly in that fight, and that had to be what they were hoping for in this fight. Saki's a guy who comes out, throws 80 punches in a combination and tries to overwhelm people. But Saki was pretty measured in this fight. Did a lot of switching to southpaw. Didn't really target the body much at all. Threw a couple of low kicks, but mainly he was just sharpshooting for the head. Had some trouble in the clinches. He did a good job stopping the takedowns, but again, I don't know if De Silva's that good at wrestling. Like, I don't know much about him other than watching him get overwhelmed by that dude. I just really wasn't that impressed. And then Saki gassed quite quickly and knocked him down with a left hook, and the ref jumped in to stop it. Early stoppage, late stoppage, does it really matter? I mean, an MMA fighter of that experience should not be losing to a guy who's 0-1 in MMA. So promising in regards to, Saki did stop the takedowns and he looked like himself on the feet, so that's good. I just, struggling to get excited until I've seen him put on his back or in against someone who can put him on his back. Then the best fight of the night was Claudia Gadelha versus Jessica Andrade. Awesome. Claudia Gadelha comes forward, gasses again, as usual. But her boxing looked better, I thought. Jessica Andrade, her corner team have clearly said, okay, we need to work on our head movement. But they've done this thing where she leans away from the punches and then starts moving her head and doesn't get in again afterwards. If you're 5'1", and you're fighting people like Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who's like 5'6" or something like that. At any rate, she's one of the shortest women in the division. Leaning away from punches is not going to do anything. That's for letting stuff fall short and then coming back in. Especially if you're a tall guy, that's great. But if you're short, there's no point leaning away. You're just going to get cracked by a right hand while you're leaning back, which is exactly what happened in this fight, and it happened a few times in the Jędrzejczyk fight. What she needs to do is square up, try and get under punches, Tyson, Archie Moore, any sort of style, go to the cross guard, go to the lock, go to, peekaboo, anything. But she needs to be getting in off her opponent's punches, not standing back and trying to bob and weave at range while leaning over her back foot. So that was weird. But when she started swarming, it was vintage Andrade, the reason I love her. And then she did some Samoan drop takedowns, which were awesome. But she benefited enormously from Gadelha gassing. Both got bloodied up pretty hard. There was a moment in half guard where Andrade was on top and she was dripping the blood in Gadelha's eyes. It's that's how far you got to go to be this sort of level of fighter. You got to be willing to, firstly, have blood dripped in your eyes, and secondly, drip blood in someone else's eyes. I thought her guard passing looked slick. Her guard passing has always looked slick. Very underrated top player. And she hit the body a lot from the top, which is really underrated. In fact, she hit that, I think it was a big high crotch or something like that, slammed Gadelha with a big, big slam. And I thought, she's looking like Pride era Rampage. Now she just needs to bang the body on the ground. And she immediately, from side control, started elbowing the body, which was Rampage's big move on the ground in Pride. He winded a lot of dudes with that. Elbows on the to the body, very underrated. My favourite elbows to the body, probably... was it Hendricks Lawler 2 or 1? I think it was 2, where Lawler stuffs the takedown and just starts raining elbows down on Hendricks' kidney, because Hendricks' back is obviously pointing at the ceiling. And Hendricks just curls up in a ball and falls off his leg. Yeah, there's a lot of things you could do to improve Jessica Andrade, and I think those are the sort of things she's going to need to avoid being lanced up and danced away from by a top-flight striker like Joanna Jędrzejczyk. But... this was the sort of fight that, looking back, I think this is the sort of best sort of matchup for her to show off what she does. She's got someone who's not a particularly nuanced striker, someone who likes to muscle people around and overwhelm them. A very technical grappler, but still, strong for that weight class and sort of fades. Whereas Andrade's thing is that she just keeps going forward through the rounds and out muscling people. I think someone who's more striking based and can circle away and stay off the cage is going to give her more trouble, as Angie Overkill Hill did in their first fight, and obviously Jędrzejczyk did. Actually, I say first fight, there's not been a second fight, but I would pay for a second fight. That was a great fight. Jessica Andrade doesn't have boring fights. A lot of people were saying this is the roidiest matchup you can make at strawweight. I mean, they're passing the tests. Do you remember there was a period just before? It was after the Jędrzejczyk match had been announced, and we were within weeks of the Jędrzejczyk match, Claudia Gadelha versus Jędrzejczyk, and people were pulling up images of the USADA site saying, why has Claudia Gadelha never been randomly tested? It was very strange. But they're passing the tests now, so best of luck to them. And on the subject of roids, we're going to get on to ADCC in a bit, but first we'll just quickly recap the Bellator 183 stuff going on. Benson Henderson had a really close fight with Patricky Frere, as is the Benson Henderson way, and it went to a split decision, as is the Benson Henderson way. The thing about Bendo is that I feel like, regardless of the level of competition, you could get someone way below his level, or what people think is way above his level, and he'll have a competitive fight with them that is close and on the cards. So it's sort of like a blessing and a curse. But Patricky Frere got the win. Started messaging, what's his name, Brent Primus, the sort of like the guy who's holding the belt, but really no one believes is the champion because of that weird win over Michael Chandler, where Michael Chandler's leg fell off. And they were just saying nice things to each other on Twitter, and Michael Chandler's like, well, you can fight for the no one knows your name belt. And I was like, it's a bold strategy, pointing out that no one knows your own opponents, Michael Chandler. But then the other exciting fight on that card was Lawrence Larkin versus Paul Daly. It did start a little bit tedious. Like they took a long time to get in range of each other. They were both pulling away from each other's kicks. Then Daly made the obvious, like, I'm going to stay in the pocket and try and hit you when you throw something. And that led to Larkin landing a few blows and getting away scot-free. But then they sort of started to pick it up a little bit more with some clinch work and stuff. A really nice step into the clinch with a knee by Daly at one point. And then coming out of the clinch, he throws a spinning back elbow / back fist, which I believe Larkin ducked under. And then a left hook immediately after it. And that puts Larkin on wobbly legs, and then he knocks him down and finishes him. Very surprising. Daly then said afterwards, if you stand with me, you're going to lose. Well, no, Douglas Lima, he outboxed you. But the thing about Daly is that he has this wickedly fast, wickedly powerful left hook, but it's very loopy, and he doesn't have a lot of creative ways to set it up. It's like the punch that if he hits someone, they're going to sleep probably. But often he telegraphs it, and there's not really that many ways he throws it, which is why this was such an interesting way for him to land it, because once you've spun, people aren't expecting stuff to keep coming from that side. So exciting finish to a sort of fight. We'll do a quick plug, and then we'll get back to the ADCC results, and then I've got a ton of questions today too. If you want to support the Fights Gone By podcast with your money, you can do so by going to Patreon and supporting us there. If you pledge $5 a month, you get the history episode, which is a big episode at the end of middle of the month that I do a lot of research to write and then lecture on, I suppose. I'll be announcing what the next one's on next week. The Pride Middleweight Grand Prix 2003 Axe Murderer episode went up 2 weeks ago. We've got a decent back catalogue now. We've got most of the heavyweight champions, all the heavyweight champions up to Joe Louis, and we got the Pride 2000 Grand Prix, the Openweight Grand Prix, and Kazushi Sakuraba, the Night of the Gracie Hunter. If you want to support me personally in a different way, you can pick up Notorious, The Life and Fights of Conor McGregor, which is the book what I wrote. It's pretty good, I think. And if you want to keep abreast of what I'm up to at the moment, most of my stuff is either on Vice or on thefightprimer.com or fightprimer.com. Last week I did the Rockhold versus Branch fight. And the week before, or however many weeks before it was, I did Koto versus Kamagai. It's just little interesting things that I pick up on, which I feel like I need to share. Right, let's do some questions. Quick reminder up front. If you want to send your question to the Fights Gone By podcast, send your question to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. Right, nice fresh mug of tea. Oh, it's scaldingly hot. And let's get into the questions. Dear Jack, I'm a proud Patreon boy and very happy customer. Your content, and on a rare occasion, a really good song, is the only media I would willingly pay for instead of pirating. Thank you. Your work has always very clearly been the product of a person who is utterly obsessed. I am obsessed. From the few tidbits one is able to glean about you from your podcast, I think it's fair to say, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, that you have, over the course of many years, spent many hundreds of hours, many thousands of dollars between membership, seminars, travel, blah, 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 and many nights in pain or injured in the course of accruing the knowledge and skills that you so gleefully continue to pursue. I guess my question is, why was it worth it? And if so, in what ways? The reason I ask is that I'm 25 now, and have been training boxing and now with BJJ with varying degrees of dedication for 2 years, and in that time I have gotten in really good shape, a huge painful dose of humility, a big bag of small but lasting injuries, a little less room in my monthly budget, a bit of cauliflower ear, a very slight but very real sense of confidence in what capabilities I do have, and a great big scary awareness of all the ones I do not. While I have had some smokers in boxing and am going to compete in BJJ for the first time soon, what I really dream about is fighting in some MMA bouts, but I really have a hard time justifying the whole thing to myself and anyone who asks, to be honest. I have never been in a street fight and don't really worry about being in one. If I did, I'd just carry a weapon, not train. I'm not some genetic freak or natural athlete. Never even played a sport before. Between that and my lack of training till later in life, I believe that I likely lack even the potential of competing at the highest levels. So for both myself and that asshole who asks me about the next time I have a black eye, why bother? Thanks so much for reading. Keep the good stuff coming. Please record Notorious as an audiobook and I swear I will buy it twice. Also, please explain what the fuck is going on with Ryan Hall. Will I ever get to see him fight again? And if so, when? From Jonathan. Right, big question. Obviously, Jonathan's going through a little bit of a... well, it doesn't sound like a crisis of confidence, but it sounds like a... well, we all have these periods where we reflect on what we're doing and go, do I really want to do this anymore? Especially if you know you're not going to be the best in the world at something. Like, Chael Sonnen famously said, like, if I'm going to fight for the belt, and if I can't be the best at this, I'll go and do something else. Of course, he didn't because he makes so much money doing this. But yeah, I mean, I can understand that sort of thing. But to me personally, I find that martial arts and combat sports, more than anything, are just how I stave off, I'm not the dark thoughts, but just, if you are one of those people who finds that you need physical exercise to avoid feeling lethargic or even depressed, that's what martial arts and combat sports are to me. I've never wanted to be a world champion in anything. I suppose because I'm so pessimistic, I'm like, never have a chance, mate. But no, I've never thought, oh yeah, I'll go and train for hours and hours and become a world champion. I train because on the days I don't train, I feel worse than on the days I do. With the exception of the days when I get very badly injured, and then I'm like, I shouldn't have gone. But it's all about scaling it to what you can do. There's no point in me or someone who isn't going to be competing at the highest levels killing themselves through 3 training sessions a day, 2 training sessions a day, and just getting continually more and more banged up with no real dividends on it. My personal philosophy has always been that I just train firstly when I can based on workload, and secondly when I want to. And sometimes you've got to weigh up when it is you don't want to because you're feeling lethargic, and when it is you don't want to because it's probably, or you do even want to, but it's probably best to take some time off, which is one of the hardest things to do. Just saying, okay, that needs a break, whatever this is needs a break. So you really have to scale it to yourself. I mean, if you do want to compete, obviously you need to up your workload and get down the gym more, and it's going to suck because you're going to have to pull yourself down there more on your own when you should be really recovering. This is why anytime someone retires from the sport, I'll never argue with the decision. I'll be like, I wish I'd seen some more of them. I love their fights. But the amount of injuries and just nagging pains that people accrue over doing this, because you, as a human being, you are not built to do the amount of training that professional fighters do to fight. It's just a slow process. Well, it's not really. It's a process of grinding yourself down over weeks and then having a little bit of time off after the fight to try and recover a bit, and then grinding yourself down again, which is why it's such a young, it's a young man's game through and through. I mean, the self-defense thing's always interesting. Some people do just get into training for self-defense. You hear a lot of stories about people getting mugged or, worse, and finding combat sports martial arts through that and it helping their confidence enormously. But I would say one of the interesting things about MMA and grappling is that where boxing, because it is in the Olympics, and judo and things like that, they have very good national programs for recognizing talent very young and grooming it. BJJ and MMA do not have anything like that. And while obviously you don't want to be as a decently smart fighter, but not an exceptional physical specimen, you don't want to be thrown in with like a John Jones. But the John Joneses are exceptionally rare in this sport. Anyone who's got that much athletic potential is normally sent over into a team sport or something a bit more lucrative with scholarships attached. The nice thing about mixed martial arts and BJJ, and to be honest, one of the reasons I still practice it as much as I do and love it as much as I do, are those moments where you're thinking ahead of someone, or you're giving someone something and going, oh, I hope they take that, and then they do, and you go, oh, I got him. Those are the moments of absolute ecstasy for me when I'm training martial arts or combat sports. Just the small, clever things you can do to make up for, you know, I couldn't beat this dude in a foot race, or I couldn't beat this dude in a lifting competition or something like that. But it's not athletic potential that's governing who wins, or, well, I say wins a fight, but wins an exchange or wins a transition or a scramble. It's what you can convince the other person to do. You are directly pitted against the other guy in wits. It's not just, we are only allowed to throw the ball, or we are only allowed to run, or whatever. You know, there's all that room to maneuver and manipulate the rules, basically, or play within the very lenient rules of these games. But it is always worth noting that there's guys like, getting onto the ADCC stuff now. Gordon Ryan has been training 4 or 6 years, something ridiculously short time. And Craig Jones is another one. These guys just coming out of nowhere. And if you look at Craig Jones, I mean, he's a fairly big lad, but he's not exceptional athlete. You wouldn't go oh yeah, get him on the Aussie Rules team or whatever. These guys who just go into it for the love of it, start competing and find out, oh, I'm actually pretty good at this. So it's always worth a go. I mean, I'd definitely say getting on the BJJ competitions. You could try some MMA. I mean, the worst that can happen is you could die, obviously, but those are very freak cases. They're very rare. Training as a part-time fighter or a hobbyist who takes a couple of fights, probably not going to get you professional fighter with 20 fights worth of CTE. You know, you can still, it'll just be an upping of your usual training as a hobby. So it's always something you can try, and then if you enjoy it, stick to it. But I would say see how you feel when you're not training, and then just weigh up how important it is to you in your life. You know, training expenses can be fairly substantial. But, you know, the reason that I still train and do things is because I'm happier doing it than I am when I'm not. Oh, and regarding Ryan Hall, I've not spoken to him in a little bit, but basically what he said to me was hope they don't keep me on the shelf after that performance, because I was I loved that performance. It's a shame that people are ragging on it. He put his foot on Gray Maynard's face something 18 times throughout the 3 rounds and just did whatever he wanted, but he turned off a lot of casuals, I suppose. Dude deserves a fight, though. I mean, Gray Maynard, obviously a bit of a waning name, but still a big name, and someone who should have had the tools. You know, if you say, oh, amazing takedowns, amazing takedown defense, decent boxing, you know, that's the sort of thing that you say, okay, Ryan Hall, let's put him against Gray Maynard. That'll tell us what he can do. And he seemed absolutely comfortable. He just kept it kicking range and then was able to Imanari roll onto the legs. And Gray Maynard never got, he could do his oh, he's not engaging me, but he was kicking you in the face. And then you didn't do anything when you got in close. Yeah, I hope Ryan gets a fight soon, actually. Anyway, cheers, Jonathan. Hey, Jack Slack, the Mac of the Back Attack. First off, I have to give you credit for the podcast. Your emphasis on certain strikes like the jab, low kicks, and body shots have helped me tremendously as I've been getting into mixed martial arts. I've been able to land a few shots on some fairly experienced fighters in the gym. My question for you is, which fighters could a beginner watch for a good understanding of how to utilize technical striking in MMA? I've been watching Joanna Jacek, good start, and his Fisting Majesty, Michael Bisping, but I would like your opinion on the matter. Your boy, George. I think Joanna Jacek's a great place to start because she's in a division of people who are, there's some guys coming up in that division, or lasses coming up in that division, who can strike decently, but Joanna Jacek is just a cut above. Her ring positioning, her strike variety, her use of the jab, her use of teeps and low kicks. She does beautiful things like pivoting offline and then immediately kicking the leg as the opponent turns. Just a very well-rounded technical striker to look at. I'm not going to say someone like Demetrius Johnson or John Jones. Let's think of some like textbook strikers. I quite liked KJ Noons back in the day. Donald Cerrone, to an extent, for the longer gentleman. Rafael dos Anjos is an interesting insight on how to go forward and be aggressive, but technically, do it in a very sound way that keeps him safe a lot of the time. Obviously, Conor McGregor, great example of a counter striker and someone who encourages the opponent to lead by coming forward and kicking the body, throwing the side kicks into the lead knee, just irritating and putting a ticking clock on the opponent and saying, come at me, and then moving back and countering when they come at him. Obviously not textbook in his fundamentals, but, a very savvy strategic fighter. Actually, let's do a little bit of a obscure one. Hayato Sakurai, or Mac, M-A-C-H, Sakurai, S-A-K-U-R-A-I. I think that's it. He was at one point the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world. He was incredible back in Shooto. Just a really hard-nosed, heavy-hitting guy, but amazing grappler. He went to Abu Dhabi in like 2001 or 2003 or something like that. Got second place in the absolute class, just by being unusual and exciting. I think he heel hooked Rico Rodriguez, who was a fairly decent fighter at the time. But Maha Sakurai had sort of a drop off, and he lost his Shooto title to Anderson Silva. He was Anderson Silva's big, first really big name, and he had a little bit of bad luck. I think he lost to Jake Shields as well, and then he was sort of like winding down his career, and he started working with Matt Hume of Demetrius Johnson fame, and he comes out with this new kickboxing style that's it's sort of meat and potatoes, but it's really effective against the guys he's fighting in Pride and later Dream. And the events that Bas Rutten commentated with him, Bas Rutten is just loving his technique. Like he'll go, jabs, right straight, right low kick, and then he'll go right straight, left hook to the body, right low kick, and then he's just going up and down the body constantly, and each combination seems to set up the next. And he had a lovely backstepping left hook counter as well, which he knocked Frank Trigg down with and a few others. But it was just interesting because he was a big banger throughout his entire career, but he wasn't really an accomplished kickboxer. And once he started working with Matt Hume, you saw a lot more combinations and movement, and it really rounded out his game, and he became a very technically strong striker from not being one. So he's definitely one to watch. That's always one I like to bring up whenever someone says, career transformation. Hey Jack, I've been a fan of yours for a long time. Your breakdowns are incredible. I really have a huge amount of respect for your work. Oh, I sense there's a but coming. I'm writing to you because I finally decided to try my hand at MMA writing, and I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. I know you don't owe me anything, and I'm not going to call you a dick for not responding or anything like that. First, do you have any recommendations on people or websites I should contact or shop my work to? And second, if I were to send you a link to one of my posts, would you take a look at it and tell me if it's even worth sending out? Thank you, sir. From Luke. I get a lot of these, and I always feel terrible that I don't I can't read everything everyone sends me. If I have a moment to sit down and read, I'm reading stuff to write about in the week, so, or for the history episodes or things like that. So I often don't have time to read other people's stuff as much as I want to. Sometimes I'll give it a scan and say, okay, I like this. I can't tell you that I've read it all the way through, but I do enjoy your the notion of what you're doing. But I used to do the same thing when I was starting out writing. I'd send more accomplished MMA writers and sports journalists my pieces and be like, hey, can you tell me what you thought of this? And very few of them actually can respond or do respond, but you really have to appreciate it when they do. Mike Chiappetta is always the one I name check because he gave me a big list of things that I could do to improve my writing when I'd written 3 articles ever. So that was really sweet of him, and you try and pay it on, but it's very hard to like give people the time that you would need to actually give them proper insight on stuff. If I do have to give any sort of insight on writing for MMA in general, I would say start with your own blog. I mean, I've been heading back that way now. I'm trying to do more of my own stuff because I like the independence, and you don't have to shop out stuff all the time. But starting out with a blog is a good way to go, because if you've got something interesting enough to say that people will read it, they'll read it on your own blog. If you can show it to enough people and get some word of mouth out there, you can always share like an article to a forum or Reddit and just say, hey, I'd really like some pointers. Just let me know what I'm doing here. And most of the time, people will give you the time of day. If you can get a little bit of a reputation for something interesting that you're writing, or some kind of interesting series, or even an individual thing, an individual article, that's the sort of thing that is important. There are a lot of opportunities for guys to write MMA news or MMA features and things like that, but there's sort of finding a way to put this in not a dickish way. What you don't want to be is cast in a role that can be done by anyone else. Which obviously, if you were someone who writes about history and analysis, it's fairly like there's about 10 of us, so there's not a lot of competition, and we all get along fairly well. But if you're just trying to write up the news pieces or something like that, and you're not putting a particularly unique spin on it, then you are the sort of person that the websites will look at as replaceable. What you've got to look at is guys like Chuck Mindenhall, the Wags, Luke Thomas, people like that, Chip Hatter, obviously, but writers who, even in writing about what's going on, like their own opinion pieces or relatively newsy pieces and things like that, they have found a way to make it interesting and their own. Some of Chuck Mindenhall's long form stuff is absolutely amazing. And when you read it, you go, that's Chuck Mindenhall. So you've got to try and look for stuff like that. And my advice would be, if you can do that on your own blog, do that rather than taking up a job doing some websites like pumping out 3 pieces a day on the news, because that's not going to help you improve your individual writing style and what you're doing. That's just going to keep you constantly with your head down trying to keep up with the deadlines. It's always worth staying independent a little bit longer if you want to try and make your own brand or rather your own name in this sort of journalism. As far as shopping work out to people, it's tricky. Most will approach you. Well, I mean, that's at least what I found. That's the thing about having a blog. And that's the thing that I know people who've been to journalism school in the last 10 years, and the thing that they get told is start a blog as part of your coursework, because blogs are how the majority of people get hired by big publications nowadays. Your qualification in something isn't going to get you hired to write about it. You have to have a proven track record of interesting content and readers, basically. So my advice is, yes, start it, do it. Find things that you have opinions on, whether they're going to incense people or not. If you can find interesting ways of putting them out there, and interesting ways of examining what's going on in the fight world, whether it be in the cage or out of it, then you can get people listening to it, and you can improve your own writing. And if you can gain your own following, you are on a much better footing when websites start approaching you, as opposed to going, can I write something for you, to websites right off the bat with very little to show them. Anyway, I hope that helps, Luke. Cheers. Right, if you haven't watched, firstly, nothing going on this weekend. We got Kevin Lee versus Tony Ferguson next weekend. But there's nothing going on this weekend. So if you've got some time, I would suggest finding the Abu Dhabi Combat Club footage and watching some of it, because it's been a really fun year. I'm still working through it at the moment. Like I said, it's Monday morning here, and I've still got day 2, most of it to watch. But I have been keeping my eye on the under 88 kilos division, which has been stellar this year. And the Absolute division was today, was the second day rather, and that's the one that you obviously want to watch immediately. Big standouts, obviously Gordon Ryan put on a ton of weight and just ran through his weight class. struggled with Dylan Dennis in his first match. Dylan Dennis has won nothing of note since he became famous, but that's sort of overshadowing the fact that he's been very, very hard to submit. Like, if you watched his match against Gary Tonin was going all out, couldn't catch him. Gordon Ryan went all out, couldn't catch him. But then Gordon Ryan went on to have a match with Romulo Barral, who is coming off like his 7th retirement, but is always, he's an all-time great. And Gordon Ryan just sliced through his guard like butter. Really nice passing. Stuck to the butterfly guard, flattened him out, climbed over his knees, and then he got pushed back to guard, did a beautiful, like, quick long step while Barral was controlling his wrist, and then took the back as he rolled away. Got the rear naked choke, finished it. He had a few other good showings. I mean, he caught Keenan Cornelius in a nice guillotine. I believe that was the final. And then in the open weight, he caught Cyborg Abreu off the bat with a heel hook. And Abreu, it looked a little bit uncomfortable. It was very strange. He just tried to put on the boot. And this is the thing that people have been saying for a while. People have been saying that the IBJJF and other big gi competitions, the knee reaping rule is, you can injure your knee by being knee reaped, but like it's no more dangerous than I don't know, jerky kimuras. Lots of other things that play on the shoulder are very damaging to your muscles and ligaments up there. But the knee reap has always been like off limits, and you hear a lot of guys give out about it. But the criticism has always been that the Brazilians would lose if you started bringing in more knee reaps and stuff. And it's interesting because Gordon Ryan just heel hooked Cyborg, despite being considerably smaller than him. He did go on to lose to Felipe Pena in a very similar way to their super fight, where he lost the heel hook and got his back taken. But the other real standout of that category, the under 88 kilos, was Craig Jones from Australia. Brilliant Z-guard player, really nice shin-to-shin stuff on when his opponent stands. But he was attacking Leandro Lo. Leandro Lo, amazing gi player. He was attacking Leandro Lo's legs throughout the first portion of their bout. Leandro Lo turns his back and he climbs onto it. Even just attacking the legs opens up other stuff upstairs. And it was nice to see Gordon Ryan's passing. He's often portrayed as like a leg lock only guy, but his back takes have always been money, and his passing looked really good in this Abu Dhabi. In fact, when he was matched with Craig Jones later on, every time Craig Jones went to the shin on shin, he just put his other foot on top of Craig Jones's foot and try and stamp it off. It's really nice. So yeah, there's some really interesting matches in that division. Gary Tonin had some fairly interesting matches, but there were, a lot of them meh, not the usual Gary Tonin sort of delightful matches, because he's a guy with like clever setups who looks for submissions from everywhere, and he'll let you pass, he'll let you get on top of him, and that's more suited to a submission only contest where he can gas you out, tie you down a little bit by letting you do some stuff in 10 minutes, where the last 5 minutes of the points or whatever the rules are at Abu Dhabi doesn't really play as well. He had a really weird match with Mafra where he was seated guard and then coming up to his knees and shooting low singles, and the other guy didn't seem to want to engage much at all. And I believe he won it because the other guy got more warnings about inactivity than he did. It was very strange. Xander Ribeiro was awesome. I think he arm-locked about 4 dudes from closed guard, which, if you've ever seen anyone grapple no-gi, pretty rare, like to arm-lock dudes from the guard. But that's what I love about the Ribeiro boys. They will find something really old school and try and make it work at the highest levels in the modern era. Like Saulo came into the Masters a couple of years ago and just started, cross-choking guys from guard, which is just not a thing. No one does that. So that was pretty cool. I haven't finished watching, well, I haven't watched much of the lighter divisions at all yet. I know that Michelle Nicolini got bronze, but then she's been around for quite a while, even though she's still young. I believe Gabby Garcia got her gold. I'll have to check that again, but it's normally like the closest thing to a certainty. So that's what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the day, catching up on that sort of stuff. I was quite enjoying Keenan Cornelius' passing without the gi, because obviously he's very famous as a gi player. He likes all the lapel guard stuff and all that, but no gi, he really likes to get control of the ankles and go for these toreadors, bullfighter passes from way away from his opponent. and then grab the double unders when they turn, or when they like Granby over their shoulders to get back to him. Does a lot of stack passing, which you wouldn't expect from a dude built like him, but he does. Anyway, as I said, no interesting fights going on this weekend, but sometimes that's nice. So remember, if you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. If you want to sign up to the Patreon and get the history episodes, go do that at Patreon. If you want to buy Notorious, the book, get it from Amazon or, anywhere actually. It's in Waterstones, and I check my local Waterstones regularly to make sure it's there and turned outwards towards the general public. Remember to check the fightprimer.com or fightprimer.com throughout the week. I'll be updating it with stuff at some point this week. I've been your boy Jack Slack. This has been Fights Gone By Podcast, episode 53. Cheers!